"Don't hurt me. I can't walk," begged the billionaire CEO. Then a black waitress changed everything. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was an ordinary evening at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Los Angeles. The golden lights from chandeliers danced across polished marble floors, and the hum of private conversations filled the air. But in the corner, a scene was unfolding that would forever change the course of events in this elegant dining room. At a corner booth sat Richard Blackwell, the CEO of Blackwell Industries, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and ironclad control over his empire. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he exuded the air of a man who had everything under control, until the moment he found himself face to face with a life-or-death situation. Richard had just come from a high-profile business meeting where things had gone horribly wrong. As the storm outside raged, a series of threats from a rival company had left him on edge. His anxiety was palpable, his usually confident demeanor now replaced with a raw, vulnerable side that only a few people had ever seen. He was surrounded by his bodyguards, but something had gone terribly wrong. As the rain began to pour harder, an unexpected attack took place. A group of armed men barged into the restaurant, guns drawn, demanding money. The room fell silent. Richard stood frozen, his wealth and power suddenly meaningless in the face of a violent threat. His bodyguards, trained for all sorts of situations, were caught off guard. The tension in the room was thick, a coldness that no amount of money could thaw. The attackers shouted demands, pushing Richard and his men aside. It was clear they weren't there for a negotiation, they were there for blood. At this moment, the restaurant staff was in chaos. Everyone was frozen, unsure of what to do. But among the confusion, there was one person who remained calm, Naomi Carter. Naomi was just a waitress at the restaurant, a woman of few words, but a sharp mind. Her uniform was standard, but the grace with which she moved was anything but. Naomi had seen her share of tough situations in life, growing up in the tough neighborhoods of New Orleans. But this was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. When the commotion broke out, Naomi instinctively knew she had to act. While the other waitstaff hid or cowered, Naomi kept her cool. Her mind raced through the possible outcomes. She had no bodyguards, no backup, just her own wits and instincts. As the men moved toward Richard, one of them grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back of the restaurant, where a hidden exit led to a back alley. Naomi's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. This wasn't just about saving a man who had no respect for her or people like her. It was about saving lives, no matter who they belonged to. She made her move, slipping through the shadows, approaching the attackers with the silence and precision of someone who knew the stakes. She was ready to act, ready to do whatever it took to change the fate of everyone in that room. Naomi Carter moved swiftly and silently through the shadows of the restaurant, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. She had been in tough situations before, but nothing compared to the danger that now loomed. The storm outside had grown fiercer, as if nature itself was amplifying the chaos inside the restaurant. The attackers, still shouting commands at Richard and his bodyguards, had no idea that their worst nightmare was about to unfold. Naomi's mind worked quickly as she observed every movement, every detail. The attackers were too focused on Richard and his frightened attempts to negotiate, but Naomi saw an opening. She had been watching the room carefully, studying the attackers' movements, their weaknesses. The noise of the storm outside was deafening, and the tension in the room was unbearable. But Naomi wasn't afraid. She'd grown up learning how to survive in the streets of New Orleans. This wasn't her first fight, and it certainly wouldn't be her last. She wasn't going to let this man who had never given her or anyone like her the time of day, be dragged away without a fight. As the attackers continued pushing Richard toward the back of the restaurant, Naomi slipped behind them, careful to keep her presence undetected. The bodyguards, once so confident, were frozen, their weapons drawn but useless in the face of the unexpected attack. Naomi knew the risk, but she also knew that if she didn't act, things would only get worse. Her breathing was calm, controlled. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, but it didn't shake her. With one swift motion, she grabbed a chair from the nearest table, lifting it with precision and launching it directly at the attacker closest to Richard. The man didn't see it coming. The chair slammed into him, knocking him off balance and sending him crashing to the floor. Naomi didn't wait to see if he got up. She rushed forward, her eyes locked on Richard, who was now staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. He couldn't believe what was happening. He was a billionaire, a CEO who had controlled every aspect of his life, but here he was, standing helpless in front of a waitress. The second attacker, startled by Naomi's sudden intervention, raised his gun, but Naomi was quicker. She grabbed a nearby wine bottle from the counter, smashing it against the man's arm, forcing him to drop the weapon. Richard, who had been too stunned to react, now watched in awe as Naomi held the attackers at bay. She moved with a grace and precision that could only come from someone who had lived through hardship and understood the value of staying calm in a crisis. The room was frozen, everyone in shock. Naomi, with her back to the wall, stood between the attackers and Richard. She wasn't just fighting for him. She was fighting for herself, for every moment she had been overlooked, for every time she had been dismissed. The attackers, realizing they were losing control, scrambled to recover, but it was too late. The restaurant's security team, who had been hiding, finally mustered the courage to step forward, subduing the remaining attackers. The police were called, and within minutes, the situation was under control. Richard stood there, still processing what had just happened. Naomi was the one who had saved his life, not the bodyguards, not his money, but a woman he had barely noticed before. The police arrived, and Naomi, though exhausted and shaken, stood tall. She had done what was needed to protect someone who had once thought of her as nothing more than a servant. Richard walked toward her, his expression now one of gratitude and respect. For the first time, he truly saw her, beyond her role as a waitress. He saw Naomi for the strength, courage, and resilience that she possessed. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. Naomi simply nodded, not needing to say a word. She had done what needed to be done. As the police took the attackers away, Naomi remained at the center of it all, a woman who had saved a billionaire not just with her actions, but with her unwavering belief in herself. Richard, who had once treated her as invisible, now knew that she was a force to be reckoned with. That night, Naomi Carter didn't just change her own destiny, she changed Richard's. She had reminded him that no matter how much money or power one has, it means nothing in the face of true courage. Naomi had proven that even in a world built on wealth and status, the greatest strength comes from within. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who could change everything. Naomi stood in the now quiet restaurant, her breath still heavy from the rush of the chaos she had just navigated. The storm outside had eased, but inside, the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Richard Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries, now sat at one of the tables, his head buried in his hands, still processing what had just happened. The police had taken the attackers away, and the restaurant had returned to its former state of calm, though everything had changed. Naomi could feel the weight of the moment, but she was already planning her next steps. She had saved his life, yes, but that wasn't what had bothered her. What bothered her was the way Richard had looked at her before. He had seen her as just another face in the crowd, an invisible waitress doing her job, never worth a second glance. But now, after everything that had happened, she could see the shift in his gaze. He was looking at her differently, with a respect he had never given her before. It made her feel a mix of pride and discomfort. She hadn't done it for his respect. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. Naomi wasn't a hero. She was just someone who had stepped up when it mattered. As she began clearing up the shattered glass from the scene of the attack, Richard stood up and approached her. His expression was one of gratitude, but there was something more, something almost like realization in his eyes. "Naomi," he started, his voice softer than she had ever heard it before. "I owe you more than I could ever repay. I don't even know how to begin thanking you." Naomi looked at him, her arms crossed, as calm as ever. She wasn't looking for thanks. She didn't need it. But she couldn't ignore the change in him. He wasn't the arrogant, untouchable billionaire he had been earlier. This was a man who had been forced to confront his own vulnerability. You don't need to thank me, Naomi replied coolly, wiping down a table. I just did what anyone would have done in my place. Richard's eyes softened. No, he said quietly. Not anyone. You risked your life for mine, and I don't think anyone else in this room would have done that. Naomi felt a momentary flush of embarrassment, but she didn't let it show. She wasn't used to receiving compliments, let alone from someone like Richard. You can't change what's already happened, Naomi said, her voice steady. But I'm not here for your thanks. I'm here to do my job, just like everyone else in this restaurant. Richard watched her, a mixture of admiration and respect in his eyes. I see that now, he said quietly. Naomi couldn't help but feel a strange shift in the air. Maybe it was just him, or maybe it was the realization that she had just made an undeniable impact. But something was different. She wasn't invisible anymore. The silence stretched between them for a moment, and Naomi turned back to her work. She was tired, exhausted, in fact, but she couldn't stop now. Not until the night was over. Richard stood there for a moment longer, clearly grappling with his own emotions. He wasn't used to feeling so powerless, and Naomi could see that. She wasn't sure why, but a part of her wanted to walk away. She didn't need to be involved in his problems. But something inside her told her that this was a moment that wouldn't come around again. He needed her, whether he realized it or not. Naomi, Richard said, breaking the silence again. I want to make this right. I want to offer you something, anything you want. Naomi didn't even hesitate. You can start by treating people with respect, she said, her voice firm. Not just because I saved your life, but because everyone deserves it. Richard seemed to take her words to heart, his expression thoughtful. He nodded slowly, his previous arrogance gone. Naomi wasn't sure if he would ever truly change, but she had done her part. Now it was up to him. As she walked away to finish her shift, Naomi felt a sense of satisfaction. She had changed the course of a billionaire's life with nothing but her courage and her conviction. In that moment, she realized that even the smallest actions could have the biggest impact. And maybe, just maybe, Richard Blackwell would remember this night. He wouldn't forget the woman who saved him. He wouldn't forget the woman who showed him what it meant to truly stand tall. As Naomi finished her shift, the weight of the night's events still hung in the air. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a clear sky, but the remnants of the chaos were still fresh in her mind. Richard Blackwell's grateful words echoed in her thoughts, but Naomi knew she couldn't let herself linger on his praise for too long. The night wasn't about him. It was about doing what needed to be done, no matter the consequences. The next morning, she found herself walking through the same city streets, the ones she had walked countless times before, but today they felt different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. As she entered the small apartment she called home, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, and when she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. It was Richard Blackwell. Naomi, I can't stop thinking about what happened last night. I owe you so much more than words can say. Please let me know if you're free for lunch. I'd like to speak with you. Naomi stared at the message for a long time. She wasn't sure what to think. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She had done her part. She didn't need anything from him. But another part of her, the part that knew what it was like to be dismissed and overlooked, couldn't ignore the opportunity. Maybe this was her chance to finally be seen, not just as a waitress, but as someone who mattered. She quickly typed a response. I'm free at noon. I'll meet you at the downtown cafe. Richard's reply was almost immediate. Perfect. I'll be there. At noon, Naomi arrived at the cafe, a small, quiet spot she had frequented for years. It wasn't the kind of place where billionaires usually dined, but she wasn't intimidated. She had learned long ago that her worth wasn't tied to the places she went or the people she interacted with. Richard was already seated at a table near the window, his phone resting face down in front of him. As Naomi approached, he stood up, his usual polished demeanor replaced with something more genuine. Naomi, he said, extending his hand. Thank you again for everything. Naomi shook his hand, but this time, there was no awkwardness. She felt like they were on equal ground. I'm glad I could help, she replied. They both sat down, and Richard wasted no time getting to the point. I've been thinking a lot about what you said last night, he began. About respect. About how I've treated people in the past. I won't lie, it's been eye-opening. I've spent so much time focused on my business, on power and control, that I lost sight of what really matters. People. Naomi listened, But she didn't let herself get swept away by his words. She had heard promises before, from people who had meant well but never followed through. "It's easy to say the right things," she said. "But it's harder to change, especially when you're so used to things being the way they are." Richard nodded, his expression sincere. "I know. And I want to change. I want to do better. I've already started taking steps to reassess how I lead my company, how I treat my employees, and how I interact with people. I can't undo what's been done, but I can do better moving forward." Naomi studied him, trying to gauge if he was being genuine. She wasn't sure, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Richard Blackwell wasn't beyond redemption. "Actions speak louder than words," she said, her tone steady. "So show me. Don't just talk about change, make it happen." Richard smiled, and this time, it wasn't a smug, entitled smile. It was one of genuine gratitude. "I will. And I'll start with you. I'd like to offer you a position at Blackwell Industries, something that aligns with your skills and your strengths. I want to make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve." Naomi didn't know how to respond. She had never imagined being offered a job by someone like Richard Blackwell. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of change, but she couldn't deny that the idea intrigued her. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice calm but unsure. "I don't need to make a decision right away." Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. "Take your time, but know that I'm serious. I've seen what you're capable of. You've already changed my life. I think you could do the same for my company." Naomi took a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a choice. She wasn't just a bystander in her own life anymore. She had power, real power, to shape her future. As she left the cafe, she couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had the ability to change the game, to break the mold, and to write her own story. Naomi left the cafe that day with her thoughts swirling. The offer from Richard Blackwell was still fresh in her mind, and part of her couldn't believe it. It wasn't just about the job. It was the respect, the acknowledgement of who she was and what she was capable of. Richard's words kept echoing in her mind. "You've already changed my life." Naomi had always prided herself on her independence, on not needing anyone to validate her. But something about the way Richard looked at her made her question if she was truly on the right path. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and decision-making. She didn't talk to anyone about the offer, not even her closest friends. This was her decision, and it wasn't something she wanted to share with others, not until she was sure. Every morning, she woke up and went about her routine, but the offer lingered in her mind like a weight she couldn't shake. It wasn't just about the opportunity to work at Blackwell Industries. It was the idea that, for once, she could step out of the shadows. For once, she could have a voice that wasn't just ignored. But with that voice would come responsibility. A responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready for. She wasn't just going to work at a company. She was going to step into a world that had always looked down on people like her. She couldn't ignore the history of her life, the struggles she had faced. Naomi had spent so many years trying to prove herself, trying to be seen, and now, someone was offering her the chance to not just be seen, but to lead. That night, as she sat in her modest apartment, she finally allowed herself to feel something other than uncertainty. She had earned this. She had earned the right to make this decision. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Richard's name flash on the screen. He had sent a simple message. "Have you had a chance to think about the offer?" Naomi stared at the screen for a long time. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she could either stay in the shadows or step into the light. She didn't want to waste any more time. Without hesitation, she typed out her response. "I've thought about it. I'm in." The message sent, and as soon as the words left her fingertips, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was ready. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew that this was the right choice for her. She was ready to take on the challenge. The next week, Naomi walked into Blackwell Industries headquarters for the first time, her heart racing with both excitement and nerves. The building was everything she had imagined, sleek, modern, and intimidating. As she entered the lobby, she was greeted by a receptionist who led her to an elevator. The ride up felt like it took forever. She wasn't just entering a new job. She was entering a world that had always seemed out of reach. When the elevator doors opened, She stepped into a glass-walled office with a view of the entire city. Richard was waiting for her, his expression calm, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made Naomi feel more at ease. "Welcome to Blackwell Industries, Naomi," he said, standing up to shake her hand. "I'm glad you're here." Naomi shook his hand firmly, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This was it. The world she had always dreamed of, a world she had worked so hard to be a part of, was now in her grasp. She had made it. But as she looked around the office, she reminded herself that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She wasn't going to let anyone forget who she was or what she could do. She had proven herself in ways no one could ignore. Now, it was time to prove it again, on a larger scale. Naomi didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She was no longer invisible. She was ready to take her place, not just in this world, but in her own story. And this time, she would write it on her own terms. Naomi settled into her new role at Blackwell Industries, but the weight of the responsibility was heavier than she had expected. Every day, she walked through the sleek, glass-walled office, surrounded by employees who were used to the high-pressure world of tech and finance. To them, she was just another person who had come to work, but to Naomi, this was everything. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an executive, and that came with its own set of challenges. At first, she kept to herself, focusing on the tasks she had been assigned. Richard had kept his promise, and Naomi had been given a position where she could make a real difference. But despite the progress, Naomi often felt like an outsider. She wasn't used to the corporate world's rhythms, the polished meetings, the cold precision, the language of power. She felt like a stranger, but she also knew that if she didn't push herself, she would fade into the background. Naomi wasn't here to fade. Every day she reminded herself of how far she had come. From working double shifts in a New Orleans restaurant to sitting in meetings with the most powerful people in the city, her journey had been anything but easy. But now that she was here, she couldn't back down. She wasn't just going to exist in this space. She was going to own it. Slowly, Naomi started to find her footing. She contributed in meetings, offering insights that surprised her colleagues. Her background in managing chaos, from handling unruly customers to navigating the unpredictability of life, gave her a unique perspective. While others focused on numbers and strategies, Naomi saw people, employees, clients, partners, and she understood how to connect with them in ways that others didn't. Richard began to notice the impact Naomi was having. At first, it was subtle, a quick nod of approval after a successful meeting or a compliment in passing. But soon, he started relying on her more and more. He asked her to lead key projects, knowing that she had the ability to turn things around when others were stuck. Naomi's confidence grew with each success. She was no longer the outsider who had been hired just to fill a role. She was becoming a trusted leader. But with that success came more pressure. People began to question her presence at the table. They wondered if Richard had hired her out of pity or if she had just gotten lucky. Naomi could feel the whispers, the glances, the subtle undermining that came with being the only woman of color in the room. It was hard, but Naomi didn't let it show. She had learned long ago to mask her feelings, to show up no matter what the world threw at her. She refused to be distracted by the doubts of others. She was here for a reason, and she was going to prove it. One afternoon, Richard called Naomi into his office. He had a new challenge for her, an important presentation for a new investor. The stakes were high, and Naomi knew that if she pulled this off, it could change everything. The investor, a wealthy entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, was known for his cold demeanor and high standards. Naomi had prepared for days, ensuring every detail was perfect. But when the day of the presentation arrived, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of her depth. As she stood in front of the investor, her palms sweating and her heart racing, Naomi took a deep breath. She had done the work. Now, it was time to trust herself. She spoke with confidence, her words clear and steady. She didn't just talk about the numbers, she told a story. She painted a picture of where Blackwell Industries could go and how their vision could change the industry. It wasn't just about selling an idea. It was about showing the investor that they were the future. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then, the investor stood up, clapping slowly. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. She had earned his respect. Richard, who had been watching from the back of the room, smiled proudly. "You've got this, Naomi," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She had proven herself as a leader, someone who could take on the challenges of the corporate world and succeed. As the investors signed the deal, Naomi realized that this was just the beginning. She wasn't done yet. There was more work to be done, more battles to fight, and more success to achieve. But for the first time in her life, Naomi felt like she had truly found her place. She wasn't just surviving in this world, she was thriving. And nothing could stop her now. As Naomi sat in her office the following week, the weight of the decision she had made was beginning to settle in. Her first big presentation had gone well, and she had earned the respect of the investor. But now, things were changing again. The pressure was mounting. It wasn't just the usual corporate stress, it was something more. She had risen to a position where her decisions now had consequences that reached far beyond just her team or department. Naomi had been given more responsibility, and with that came more scrutiny. People were watching her. There was no denying that, and as much as she tried to stay focused, she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of whispers that followed her through the halls of Blackwell Industries. Some were congratulatory, acknowledging her rise in the company, while others questioned if she was truly capable of handling the responsibilities on her plate. "She's just lucky," some murmured. "What does she really know about running a business?" The voices were quiet, but they were there, just beneath the surface. And they stung. Naomi didn't let it show, though. She had learned long ago to push past the doubts and focus on the task at hand. But this new challenge was unlike anything she had faced before. Richard had tasked her with managing a critical project that would affect the company's future direction. It was a huge opportunity, but it also came with the risk of failure. The project involved an acquisition of a smaller tech firm, one that had a lot of potential, but also several vulnerabilities. Naomi had to make a decision that could either propel Blackwell Industries forward or set it back years. The stakes were high, and as she gathered her team to begin the project, she could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the future of the company, the people who relied on her, and the legacy she was building. As she sat in the meeting room with her team, Naomi's mind raced. She had prepared thoroughly, going over every detail of the acquisition, but the pressure was overwhelming. Her colleagues, some of whom had more experience than she did, were waiting for her to make the call. There was no room for error. "Naomi," one of the senior managers spoke up, his tone respectful but cautious. "You're leading this project. What's your take on the risks here?" Naomi paused, collecting her thoughts. She had to be sure. "The risks are significant," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But the potential for growth is even greater. If we can navigate the challenges and integrate their technology, it could change everything for us. But we can't rush into this without a solid plan. We need to be strategic and cautious, and we need to ensure that we're ready for the long-term commitment." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Naomi had taken charge, and for the first time in her career, she felt the full weight of leadership. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. Her team looked to her for direction, and she knew that she couldn't afford to second-guess herself. The decision was hers to make. And with that responsibility, Naomi realized something that had been slowly dawning on her. This was no longer about proving herself to others. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of making the hard decisions, and that she had earned the right to lead. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and strategic planning. Naomi worked tirelessly, often staying late into the night to review documents, meet with stakeholders, and ensure everything was on track. The pressure mounted, but she held her ground. She wasn't going to let the doubts of others, or her own, stand in her way. And then, the moment came. The acquisition deal was finally on the table. Naomi and her team had worked through every obstacle, and now it was time for Blackwell Industries to make its move. As she sat across from the executives of the smaller tech firm, Naomi felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a leader, a force to be reckoned with. When the deal was finalized, and the signatures were on the dotted line, Naomi allowed herself a moment of relief. She had done it. But as the excitement of the achievement settled, she knew that this was just one step in a much larger journey. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Naomi felt ready for whatever came next. She had proven herself not just to Richard Blackwell or her colleagues, but to herself. She wasn't just a woman who had risen from humble beginnings. She was a woman who had earned her place at the table, and she wasn't going anywhere. Naomi walked into the conference room with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The acquisition was now complete, and Blackwell Industries was poised for a major transformation. The company had grown, and so had she. As she sat down at the table, surrounded by the executive team and key stakeholders, Naomi could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. But this time, it didn't intimidate her. It fueled her. Richard Blackwell had taken a step back, allowing Naomi to take the lead on this project, and now the results were starting to speak for themselves. The deal was a success. The integration process was moving smoothly, and Blackwell Industries was ready to expand in ways that no one had anticipated. But with success came new challenges. Naomi knew that this was just the beginning of her journey, not the end. The company was on the verge of something big, and as the person responsible for the acquisition, she couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. There were still hurdles to overcome, and Naomi was determined to lead the charge. As the team discussed the next steps, Naomi's mind was racing. There was so much to consider: new partnerships, product development, market expansion. She was no longer just managing a project. She was managing the future of the company. And for the first time, Naomi truly believed that she was up to the task. After the meeting, Richard pulled her aside. His face was serious, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes. "You've done an exceptional job, Naomi," he said, his voice low. "I can't tell you how impressed I am. You've proven yourself, not just to me, but to everyone in this company." Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had earned his respect, but more importantly, she had earned her own. She had faced countless challenges, and each time, she had risen to the occasion. "Thank you, Richard," she said, her voice steady. "But this is just the beginning. We've got a lot more work to do." Richard smiled, nodding in agreement. "I know," he said, "and I have no doubt that you're the one to take us there." As Naomi left the office that evening, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. She had proven herself, and the road ahead was hers to shape. But as the days passed, Naomi found herself reflecting on something deeper. She had spent so many years fighting for recognition, trying to prove that she was capable, that she had never truly considered what it meant to lead. It wasn't just about making the right decisions or achieving success. It was about the people she was leading and the impact she would have on their lives. Naomi had always been the person who worked in the background, doing everything herself and keeping her head down. But now, she was at the forefront of a company that relied on her vision and leadership. The weight of that responsibility felt different now. It wasn't just about her. It was about the people she was serving. It was about building something that would last, something that would make a difference in the lives of the employees, the clients, and the communities they served. That night, Naomi sat at her desk, the city lights outside her window casting a soft glow across the room. She wasn't just a waitress who had made it to the top of the corporate ladder. She was a leader, someone who had the power to change the course of an entire company. And that realization was both humbling and empowering. She had earned her place at the table, but the real work was just beginning. The next day, Naomi took a walk through the office, her mind focused on the future. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, but this time, it didn't bother her. They weren't looking at her with skepticism anymore. They were looking at her with respect, with the understanding that she had earned her spot. Naomi knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready for whatever came next. She wasn't just surviving in the corporate world. She was thriving, and she was going to keep pushing forward, one decision at a time. Naomi had done the impossible. She had proven that a woman of color, could rise to the top, break through the barriers, and take her place among the giants. And now, she was ready to make her mark on the world, to build a legacy that would last long after she was gone. Naomi wasn't just a leader. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the months went by, Naomi's life continued to transform in ways she had never imagined. Blackwell Industries was thriving, and Naomi had become an integral part of the company's leadership team. Richard Blackwell had made good on his word. He gave her the space she needed to implement her ideas, and her innovative approach was now shaping the company's future. She was no longer just a participant in the business world. She was now a trailblazer, setting the course for what was to come. Yet, even with all the success, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Despite her newfound confidence and the respect she had earned, there were moments when she felt like an outsider. The whispers in the hallway, the sideways glances, still lingered. But she had learned to brush it off. She had bigger things to focus on. Naomi was no longer fighting to be seen. She was fighting to ensure that the work she did was meaningful and impactful. She had set her sights on creating opportunities for others, especially for those who, like her, had been overlooked. She pushed forward, not just for her own success, but to build something that would leave a lasting legacy. One day, after another high-stakes meeting with a potential investor, Naomi walked out of the conference room to find Richard waiting for her in the hallway. He looked at her with a mixture of pride and something deeper, appreciation. "You did great in there," Richard said, his voice low. "You've got this, Naomi. I've never seen anyone handle themselves with such grace and power in these situations." Naomi felt a flicker of pride, but it was quickly replaced by the weight of what still needed to be done. "I'm just getting started," she replied. "There's still so much more to do." Richard smiled, nodding in agreement. "I know, and I want you to know that I'm fully behind you. Whatever you need, I'm here. This company, this entire industry, is better because of you." Naomi felt the sincerity in his words. She had never expected this kind of mentorship, this kind of respect, from someone like Richard. He had changed, and so had she. It was a partnership now, one built on mutual trust and shared goals. Naomi didn't need to be told that she had made it anymore. She knew. She had earned her place in this world, not by chance, but through her strength, her determination, and her unwillingness to let anyone define her. As she looked out at the city skyline from the window of her office, Naomi reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the days when she worked late shifts as a waitress, hoping for a better life. She had dreamed of moments like this, but she never imagined the road would be so challenging. Still, every struggle had led her to this point. Every doubt, every setback, had only fueled her fire. And now, she was a leader, a woman who had shattered barriers and redefined what it meant to rise to the top. But even more importantly, she was a woman who had proven that anything was possible, no matter where you started. Naomi knew her journey wasn't over. There were still obstacles to overcome, still barriers to break. But she was ready. She had the strength to face whatever came next. As she stood there, looking out over the city she had conquered in her own way, Naomi realized that her story was just beginning. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force that would continue to shape the world, not by asking for a seat at the table, but by creating her own. And that was the legacy she would leave behind. This inspiring story of a woman's rise from humble beginnings to a powerful leader is one of the most powerful Black stories you will ever hear. It shows the resilience, determination, and strength required to break through the barriers that society places in front of you. From being a waitress in a small restaurant to becoming a key figure at one of the most influential companies in the country, this Black story proves that with hard work, courage, and a relentless drive, anyone can defy the odds and achieve greatness. Along the way, Naomi's journey illustrates the importance of self-belief and the impact that kindness and empathy can have in shaping your future. In this Black story, we see how Naomi, despite the doubts and challenges, carved out her place in a world that wasn't always welcoming. It's a reminder that no matter the obstacles, the path to success is built on self-confidence and the courage to stand up when others are too afraid. This Black story also emphasizes the importance of respect for yourself and for others, showing that leadership is not just about being in charge, but about inspiring others to rise with you. With every new challenge Naomi faced, she continued to prove that Black stories are full of lessons in perseverance, overcoming adversity, and embracing new opportunities. Her story is an example of how a single person can change their destiny, rewrite their narrative, and break free from the constraints that society places on them. Naomi's journey is not just one of personal success, but a testament to the power of Black stories in inspiring change and lifting others up. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or told you couldn't make it, Naomi's story will inspire you to push forward and take your place in the world, just as she did.